Right, well, I want you to picture the scene. The sun is beating down on a dusty hillside overlooking the sparkling Sea of Galilee. A motley crew has gathered. They're here to hear Jesus deliver his now famous Sermon on the Mount. Have a look around. Perhaps surprisingly, this is no gathering of the elite. Instead, these listeners are the ordinary, the overlooked and the marginalised, a kaleidoscope of weathered faces etched with hardship, trial and poverty. Suddenly, a breathtaking one-liner drops. Jesus looks at this unassuming assembly and astonishingly declares them to be salt of the earth and the light of the world. And with these two startling statements, Christ reframes this crowd of nobodies as being catalysts for global transformation. This wasn't just some motivational pep talk, though. It was a divine invitation. Jesus was calling these unremarkable individuals to be the launch party for his heavenly kingdom, the surprising carriers of his ancient promises to renew the world. Now, I'm not saying that you are a motley crew or a crowd of nobodies, but that invitation is still valid for us today. Jesus invites you to be the salt and light in a world that desperately needs him, to infuse your spheres of influence with his love, his grace, and his truth. Now, when Jesus tells us that we are the salt of the earth, he is telling us far more than we might at first think. The people who first heard Jesus say this would have thought about it quite differently. It's difficult for us these days to realise how valuable salt was back in the time when Jesus walked the earth. Salt is so common in our world. It's one of the cheapest things that we can buy. We're always being told, aren't we, that we eat too much of it. But back in the time of Jesus, salt was much, much harder to obtain, and it was much more valuable. In fact, salt was so valuable that Roman soldiers were sometimes paid with special salt rations, and that is actually where our word salary comes from. And it's also why when somebody is not doing their job, we sometimes remark they are not worth their salt. It was also important because of its value as a preservative. Before electricity, fridges and freezers, salt was one of the main ways to preserve food. So to be told that we are the salt of the earth is really saying that we are very valuable and very useful. The world needs us, and for whatever mysterious reason, Jesus has decided that he also needs us. And as the salt of the earth, we are both valuable and useful to God and to his world. But there is another important quality of salt. It's valuable, it's useful, but it's not by itself, because salt is no good on its own. It doesn't exist for itself. We may have a salt cellar on the table, but it isn't the meal. It's simply there to help the meal taste better. And that is true for us as Christian people. We are valuable, we are important, but not for ourselves. We are best serving our purpose when we live for Jesus, when we live for others, not for ourselves. In fact, you could even say that the church is only really doing what it was created to do when it is doing it for others. And that's true for all of us as Jesus' disciples. We are important to the kingdom, but only when we exist for more than ourselves. I've never had a packet of Smith's crisps, but I think in them, do they still put now, they have those little blue bags of salt, don't they? So, I mean, I know you used to have them years ago, but I'm sure they have them nowadays. So you can either have the crisps as they are, or you can have that bit of season, and it tastes all the different. We are like that blue bag of salt. There is an old Roman saying that there is nothing more useful than sun and salt. And in our Bible reading, Jesus calls us both the salt of the earth and the light of the world. It is quite a compliment to be called the salt of the earth. but maybe even more of one to be called the light of the world. In John's Gospel, as we know, Jesus says that he himself is the light of the world. And yet here in this Sermon on the Mount, Jesus tells us that we are the light of the world. I wonder what went through those people's minds as they sat there on that hillside, that crowd of people listening to Jesus. I wonder if his disciples were wondering what had they got themselves into. As I said earlier, in Jesus' time, salt was more valuable and so was light. Back then, you just couldn't walk into a room and flip a switch and turn on the light. We take light for granted these days. Some of us, I think it was in the 70s, maybe remember the power cuts when we had to search around for candles. But on the whole, light is always there. It's always available. To be told we are the light of the world is again like salt, to be told that we are extremely important and valuable. Jesus calls us to let our light shine, both in the church and in the community. And he challenges us not to hide our light. We all have a little light to share with the world. Now, you may not think that you have much to offer. You don't have much time. You've no obvious talent, to say nothing of your finances or lack thereof. But the Bible tells us that every one of us has exactly enough to let our light shine in this world. God has given to us exactly what he needs from us. Every light matters. Every person counts. And even the smallest light is a welcome sight in a dark place. So both of these elements, salt and light, are talking about the presence that we Christians have in our world. They show to us the importance of the influence of the kingdom of heaven within us, that we must spread the flavour of salt and show in the darkness of our world the one true light of Jesus Christ reflected through our lives. We need to make our presence felt in the world. We need to be an influence of good. Now, I was really surprised the other day when I was talking with Cliff and we were talking about being an influence, and he had never heard that some people are actually paid. It's their job to be an influencer. Now, did you all know that? Have you ever heard of Avril's? You get it a lot on American TV, don't you? Well, so let me explain what, if you don't know what an influencer is. Well, actually, I'm going to let Google explain. So this is what Google says. Social media influencer jobs are jobs for an individual who has built an online reputation and established credibility in a specific industry, such as beauty, fitness, or gaming. This person has a large and active following, which they can easily persuade to act others based on their recommendations and suggestions. So, for instance, and I'm not being sexist here, you might have a young woman who's really good with makeup, so she is paid to be an influencer, and she will influence lots and lots of other people, and they buy this stuff. It may be somebody who is really into trainers and they are talking about the latest trainers to wear. So these people are actually paid, they're called influencers. And certain brands also pay influencers to create content that feature their products or service. So does anybody know who the most famous influencer is? Who can you think of? Somebody in this world who's the most famous influencer? Anybody going to guess? No, it isn't Elon Musk, but good guess. It's somebody who's way up there. It's Cristiano Ronaldo, the footballer. So he is an influencer, and this is what he earns. So every time he posts something, he earns an astonishing $3.23 million per post. So his massive reach, combined with his global fame, make him a dream for brands like Nike and Clear shampoo. He is an influencer, and the people are paid to do this. They earn good money. But what kind of influence do we have? What kind of influence do we have to our fellow workers, our family, our friends, our neighbours, and so on? When we look back in history, there are so many Christian men and women who have had a massive influence through their presence in the world. William Carey, for example, some of you may have heard of him. He was born in 1761 in a tiny village in Northamptonshire. He was a shoemaker. He heard the call to be a missionary. And in preparation, this man mastered Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and Italian. In 1792, he preached on expect great things from God, attempt great things for God. A year later, he arrived in India, but he saw no converts for 7 years. By the time of his death in 1834, Carey had led hundreds to Christ. He had founded a Christian college, translated the Bible into 40 languages. He had a massive influence on the world. There are countless more people who have had a tremendous influence for good to the world. We think of Gladys Aylward, a missionary to China, Elizabeth Fry, the prison reformer, Eric Liddell, the Olympian and missionary to China, David Livingstone, a missionary to Africa, George Muller, the founder of care homes for orphans, Mother Teresa for her work in the slums of Calcutta. But you don't have to be famous. You don't have to be well known to be a good influence, to be salt and light in this world. What would it look like for you this week to be that light in your home, among your neighbours, in your workplace or college or with friends? Maybe it will be the kindness you show to someone at work who is really stressed, or offering forgiveness when you'd rather hold a grudge, choosing integrity over profit, listening deeply to a friend who feels unseen. It could be choosing kindness over sarcasm in a tense moment. Maybe it's sharing a word of hope with someone who feels stuck in darkness. Dwight L. Moody said, "We are told to let our light shine. And if it does, we won't need to tell anybody it does. Lighthouses don't fire cannons to call attention to their shining. They just shine." The thing is, if we as Christians don't have an influence of good, there are plenty of other people who will have an influence that will be tainted because they don't know Jesus. Consider these words for a moment. Allow their full weight to resonate in your heart as you hear them. You are the light of the world. Imagine Jesus looking you in the eye, gently repeating himself in case you missed it the first time. You are the light of the world. Not you will be if you try hard enough. Not you might be someday when you have it all together. You already are. You are the light of the world. You already have inside you everything you need to shine brightly and beautifully in a world that is often dark, chaotic, and lacking in hope. The world around us doesn't need a perfect person to come into their life and show them the way to Jesus. They need you. And when we live connected to Jesus, his love will spill out in our ordinary, everyday moments, and his presence will be felt.